In 1521, a Portuguese expedition, captained by Gonçalvo Coelho, penetrated the Brazilian wilderness deeper than any European had before. Of the 23 men who embarked on this verdant quest for gold and precious stones, merely 7 survived. These returnees, scarred by feverish lesions, swore off any future endeavors in those lands. Official reports to the crown cited illness, attacks from hostile tribes, and starvation as the causes. However, the ship's logs, sealed and sent directly to King Manuel, detailed a different narrative. A creature the Tupi Indians called Mappingari, a forest demon with a mouth in its belly, a devourer of men whose roar drove men mad and caused women to miscarry. For 3 centuries, these expedition records languished in Lisbon's archives, until the 1755 earthquake razed most royal documents. Only fragments of ship's clerk Miguel de Souza's diary, preserved in a private collection, endured, allowing for the reconstruction of that ill-fated voyage. Modern cryptozoologists theorize the Portuguese encountered the last remnants of megatheriums, colossal ground sloths believed to have vanished 10,000 years ago. Yet, eyewitness accounts contain particulars that defy any scientific classification. If you are intrigued by narratives of early European encounters with the New World's terrors, of creatures defying zoological texts, and the steep price paid by those who trespassed into forbidden domains, then continue reading. The expedition commenced its journey from the settlement of San Vicente on March 23rd. Captain Coelho, a 42-year-old veteran of Indian and African coastal explorations, assembled a robust team. Experienced soldiers, several indigenous guides from coastal tribes, and Father Pedro, a priest tasked with documenting their discoveries. Their provisions included 2 months' worth of supplies, gunpowder and lead for harquebuses, steel swords, crossbows, medical instruments, and trade goods like glass beads and metal mirrors for native populations. 8 local porters carried these items, agreeing to proceed only to a specific boundary. Beyond that, they warned, lay the dominion of Mappingari, a region no sane person would enter. The initial 10 days were arduous, but typical for tropical rainforests. The oppressive heat and pervasive humidity caused perpetual dampness in clothes, torrents of sweat, and skin rashes. Mosquitoes swarmed exposed flesh, and leeches infiltrated boots and garments. Daily, the ship's medic, Antonio, extracted these parasites, cauterizing wounds with a hot iron. The guides followed faint paths, periodically marking trees to ensure a clear return route. The surrounding forest teemed with life, chirping birds, howling monkeys, rustling leaves. At night, this cacophony intensified, making sleep almost impossible. On April 1st, the group arrived at a wide, muddy river, its slow-moving brown water laden with silt and fallen leaves. On its bank, they discovered an abandoned Indian village. Huts and utensils were undisturbed, but no people were present. In the village center, spread a large communal dwelling, a pole soared upward, topped with the skull of an unidentified creature. This enormous skull, the size of a wine barrel, boasted massive, powerful jaws, yet its shape was oddly elongated, bearing traces of what seemed like armor on its posterior. Its teeth were broad and flat, characteristic of a herbivore, but long, sharp fangs, approximately 10 centimeters each, protruded. Scribe Duza sketched the skull in his diary, noting that the guides refused to approach the pole, declaring it a warning that Mappingari had claimed several villagers, forcing the abandonment of the settlement. The pole with the skull signaled others to keep their distance. Captain Coelho ordered a thorough search of the village, seizing any useful items. Soldiers found spears, stone axes, and clay pots. In one hut, they discovered a bundle of dried meat, which they appropriated. The Indian guides grew increasingly apprehensive, repeatedly urging the captain to turn back, stating they could go no further. Coelho refused. The expedition's objective was clear: locate the gold rumored to be mined by tribes deep within the continent. He had no intention of returning empty-handed due to native superstitions. They traversed the river on makeshift rafts, a process that consumed an entire day. The water was warm, dark, and infested with caimans and piranhas. During loading, one porter slipped and fell into the river. Though quickly retrieved, 3 of his toes were missing, bitten off by piranhas during his struggle. His wound was cauterized and bandaged, and he limped for the remainder of the journey. On the opposite bank, the forest transformed. Trees grew denser, their trunks bulkier, their crowns forming a dense canopy that allowed little light to reach the ground. The air grew even more humid, imbued with the scent of decay and mold. The earth underfoot was soft, yielding with every step. Exposed tree roots formed an intricate labyrinth, demanding constant climbing. The guides advanced with increasing caution, frequently pausing to listen and sniff the air. On April 5th, the 3rd day after the crossing, Tupac, the senior guide, conversed at length with the captain in his language, gesturing towards the forest. The interpreter explained that Tupac spoke of large tracks he had observed miles earlier. Tracks that shouldn't be present, as the creature making them typically hunted higher in the mountains. Coelho commanded them to reveal the tracks. They retraced their steps, and Tupac pointed to the ground. There, in the soft mud between roots, was a colossal footprint, the size of a shield, with 3 toes. Each toe terminated in a claw mark as long as a human palm. The impression's depth indicated an immense weight. The clerk measured the print, 2 feet and 3 inches long, nearly 2 feet wide. He sketched it, contrasting it with his boot for scale. The footprint was 4 times larger. Murmurs arose among the soldiers. Some advocated retreat, while others claimed the tracks were old and the creature long departed. The captain personally examined the tracks, feeling their edges. The earth within the prints was still damp, not yet fully dry. The tracks were fresh, less than a day old. The order was to press on, but with heightened vigilance. 2 soldiers scouted ahead, and 2 protected the rear. Harquebuses remained loaded, fuses constantly smoldering. The next 3 days passed in tense silence. The detachment progressed slowly, no more than 3 meters daily. The forest grew increasingly impenetrable, requiring machetes to clear paths through tangled vines and bushes. Exhausting work that wore down the men. On April 8th, they encountered a fallen tree. A massive trunk, 3 times a man's girth, blocked their path. The tree had not been felled or blown over. It had been uprooted. Its colossal root system jutted into the air, still shedding earth. The trunk bore deep, parallel grooves, as if carved by giant claws. A soldier named Joao, an experienced woodcutter, inspected the damage. He declared no known animal could inflict such marks. The grooves were 3 to 4 inches deep in strong, hard wood. Whatever wrought this possessed incredible power. Near the fallen tree, the ground was churned, grass trampled, and bushes uprooted. The tracks led deeper into the forest, diverging from the detachment's course. Tupac explained that Mappingari marked its territory as a warning to other creatures. Captain Coelho decided to circumvent the area. The detachment turned south, weaving through the trees. The path grew even more challenging, often requiring them to backtrack to find an alternative route. By that evening, a powerful, sickening odor reached them, a mix of decay and musk, with something sharp and acrid, like a diseased animal. The stench was so intense that several men began to choke and cough. Dr. Antonio instructed everyone to breathe through vinegar-soaked cloths. The smell lingered through the evening and half the night. They established camp in a low-lying area between hills, lighting 3 fires around the perimeter. Guards rotated every 2 hours. The night was uneasy. The usual forest sounds had ceased, replaced by an unnatural stillness. Only occasionally did the distant crackle of breaking branches pierce the silence. At dawn, they discovered one porter had vanished. He had been on guard duty from 2 to 4 a.m., to be relieved by his comrade. At the appointed time, the guard was absent from his post. His harquebus lay on the ground beside the extinguished fire, its wick burned out. They searched the camp's vicinity. There were no signs of a struggle. Only 30 yards from the fire did they find blood on the ground, a few drops on leaves, and a footprint. The same large, deep, three-toed print. One footprint led into the forest, then disappeared on solid ground. The missing man was never found. The captain allotted 2 hours for the search, then ordered them to continue their journey. Despite the lack of proof, the man's quick escape and the darkness of the night weren't enough to convince anyone that he had simply vanished. Bloodstains and a distinct footprint near the archibus told a clearer, grimmer tale. As the detachment pressed onward, a heavy gloom settled upon them. The Indian guides, their faces etched with fear, conversed in hushed tones, darting nervous glances at the surrounding forest. Finally, 2 of them approached the captain, pleading for their release, adamantly refusing to proceed further, regardless of any potential reward. Quo, however, denied their request, reminding them of their contractual obligation to remain with the expedition until its conclusion. That very night, the guides vanished. They slipped away with their belongings, disappearing into the cover of darkness, heedless of the dangers posed by the wilderness. By morning, only their absence remained. The sole individual who stayed with the expedition was Dogo, a mestizo interpreter raised among the Portuguese who held little stock in indigenous legends. The loss of their guides intensified the expedition's hardships. They were forced to rely on a compass and the sun's position, but the dense, overhead forest canopy rendered the sun almost imperceptible. Their progress became aimless, a desperate push toward the mountains, rumored to hold abundant gold. On April 11th, a subtle shift in the landscape began. The trees grew more spaced out, and the ground became firmer, interspersed with rocky patches. Ahead, undulating hills, sparsely vegetated, came into view. The captain interpreted this as an encouraging sign, a clear indication that the mountains were within their grasp. By evening, they reached a roughly circular clearing, spanning approximately 300 yards. The ground was littered with bones, hundreds of them, belonging to various animals like tapirs, peccaries, deer, and caimans. However, interspersed among them were numerous human remains, skulls, ribs, and long limb bones. All the bones bore the marks of being gnawed clean, some even split open, their interiors plundered for brains. In the center of the clearing, an overpowering stench permeated the air, a scent they recognized, but now magnified 100-fold. It was a suffocating blend of putrefaction and a raw, untamed bestiality. The soldiers halted at the clearing's edge, their advance stalled by apprehension. Father Pedro, making the sign of the cross, began to recite a prayer. Clerk Duza, in his journal, described the scene as resembling a predator's den, but for a creature of immense size, habitually capable of killing and consuming prey as large as humans. The captain issued an order for the men to skirt the clearing, not to enter it. The detachment proceeded along its perimeter, maintaining a distance of 50 yards from the bone-strewn ground. The journey was prolonged, the clearing's expanse proving greater than initially perceived. As twilight descended, a sound emerged. Initially, it was a low, indistinct rumble, akin to distant thunder. Then it intensified, escalating into a roar, a deep, vibrating roar that resonated not only in their ears, but vibrated through their entire bodies. Their chests thrummed, their bones trembled, and the very air seemed to pulsate with the sound. The roar persisted for approximately 10 seconds before abruptly ceasing. Everyone froze, breath held. The silence that followed was deafening. A minute later, the roar reverberated again, this time noticeably closer. It emanated from the clearing, from the very spot where the bones lay. The third roar was alarmingly close, no more than 100 yards away. Several soldiers collapsed to their knees, hands clapped over their ears. One began to pray aloud, his voice quivering with fear. Two others gripped tree trunks, struggling to maintain their balance, the sound leaving them disoriented. The captain commanded his men to prepare their armaments. The arquebusiers loaded their firearms and checked their fuses. The crossbowmen drew their bows, knocking bolts into place. The swordsmen unsheathed their blades. Each man oriented himself towards the clearing, anticipating an imminent assault. Yet none materialized. The roar echoed once more, then faded into silence. The stillness returned, broken only by the alarmed cries of distant birds. The squad remained on high alert for another hour, until complete darkness enveloped them. The captain then ordered a retreat, instructing them to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the clearing. They trekked for 2 hours through the night, stumbling, falling, and clinging to branches. When the forest became too dense to penetrate further, they halted and established a camp. No fires were lit, for fear their glow might attract the creature. They huddled together in the darkness, weapons at the ready. 6 sentries were strategically positioned in a circle, each with 2 comrades visible to their rear. The night stretched on interminably. At dawn, a count confirmed that everyone was present, offering a sliver of hope. After a cold breakfast and sips of water from their flasks, the captain assembled the group. He outlined a plan. They would continue their push towards the mountains, but would now avoid open areas, sticking exclusively to the dense forest where the large creature would be hindered in its movements. The subsequent days were a nightmare. The group navigated the forest in a zigzagging pattern, attempting to move northward towards the mountains. The creature, however, shadowed them, not directly on their heels, but consistently in proximity, moving parallel to their course. Periodically, they would hear the snapping of branches off to the side, catch a fleeting glimpse of something massive between the trees, or discover fresh tracks. The same distinctive 3-toed imprints. On April 14th, 2 more individuals vanished. Soldiers positioned at the rear, guarding the column, were the last to be seen. Those at the front heard screams, turned to find the rear empty. Only 2 unloaded arquebuses lay on the ground, and drag marks led into the undergrowth. They rushed to intervene, but it was too late. 30 yards from the disappearance point, they found the bodies, or rather, what remained of them. Both soldiers had been torn apart, their limbs ripped off, their chests savagely opened, and their entrails pulled out. Death had been swift, yet horrifying. Near the remains, the ground was churned, and bushes uprooted. Tracks abounded. Colossal, deeply impressed 3-toed prints. And something else, peculiar. On the trunk of the nearest tree, 8 feet above the ground, were claw marks. 4 deep, parallel grooves, as if the creature had stood on its hind legs and scored the bark. The clerk meticulously sketched the attack scene and measured the tracks. The front paw prints were smaller than the rear ones, about 1 foot long, but the claws embedded within them were notably longer. The tree marks indicated claws measuring 6 to 7 inches. There was no time to bury the dead. The captain ordered an immediate and hasty retreat. The detachment practically ran, pushing through the thickets, oblivious to the scrapes from thorns and the bites of insects. Panic began to spread through their ranks. People looked back every few steps, flinching at every rustle in the foliage. By evening, they reached a river. It was narrow and swift-flowing, its waters clear and cold. The captain decided the river would offer a good defensive position. They established their camp on the bank, their backs to the water. Fires were lit, and guards were posted. Their hope was that the creature would not attempt to cross the river, that the water would act as a barrier. Their hope proved futile. Around midnight, the sentry on the left flank cried out. Everyone sprang to their feet, grasping their weapons. Something was moving in the darkness, emerging from the forest. It was massive, indistinct, slow, yet inexorable. The captain ordered them to fire. 2 arquebuses roared almost simultaneously, their flashes momentarily illuminating the night. In the brief bursts of light, the creature became visible. It was immense, 12 feet tall, possibly more, even on all fours. Its body was colossal, covered in thick, reddish-brown fur. Its forelegs were long and powerfully muscled, terminating in enormous, sickle-shaped claws. Its hind legs were shorter, but thick as columns. Its head, in proportion to its body, was small and elongated, with powerful jaws. But the most terrifying feature was its underside. Where a normal animal would have a belly, there was a vertical slit, surrounded by folds of skin and fur. As the creature moved, the slit opened, revealing rows of teeth within. Not just one row, but several concentric rings, like those of a shark. The bullets found their mark. One struck its shoulder, the second its side. The creature flinched, halted, and emitted a guttural growl. It was that same vibrating roar, setting their bones to resonate. Several soldiers collapsed, covering their ears. Then, the creature lunged forward, no longer with its previous slowness, but swiftly, rapidly, despite its colossal size. It covered the distance to the camp in a matter of seconds. A massive paw descended, crushing the nearest soldier like an insect. Another paw swept away 2 others, sending them flying yards back. Arquebuses and crossbows discharged, but in the darkness and chaos, hits were scarce. The creature moved among the men, dispatching them with blows from its paws, seizing them with its claws, tearing them asunder. Someone plunged into the river, attempting to swim to safety. The creature followed, entering the water, grabbing the swimmer, and dragging him into its belly mouth. The water turned dark. Captain Coelho shouted commands, striving to organize a defense, but it was utter pandemonium. Father Pedro stood, crucifix held aloft, reciting an exorcism. The creature ignored him, moving on to another victim. Scribe Duza fled. He snatched his journal, tucked it under his arm, and ran along the riverbank, away from the camp. Behind him he heard screams, roars, and gunshots. He ran until his strength gave out, then collapsed, hiding beneath the roots of a giant tree, lying there without breathing. The sounds of battle persisted for approximately half an hour. Then, silence descended. The clerk remained in his hiding place until dawn, motionless. As day broke, he cautiously crawled out and made his way back to the camp. The scene was horrific. Bodies were everywhere, on the shore, in the water, amidst the trees. 14 people were dead, torn apart, partially consumed. Captain Coelho lay beside the fire, his chest ripped open, his heart extracted. Father Pedro was deceased, the crucifix still clutched in his hand. Yet, 3 survivors were ultimately found. Trooper Huang had camouflaged himself in a tree, having ascended it during the assault and remaining there for the entire night. Dr. Antonio lay injured and unconscious, yet still alive. Translator Do Yogo, along with the clerk, had fled, seeking refuge in the brush. The quartet of survivors regrouped and surveyed the camp's wreckage. Most of their provisions were destroyed, and their weapons lay scattered. They salvaged what they could: 3 arquebuses, some gunpowder, a meager amount of food, and water flasks. They bandaged the doctor and fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches and clothes. Unanimously, they decided to immediately return to the coast, to their ships, to civilization, to the promise of gold, exploration, and glory. None of these pursuits held any meaning anymore. Only survival mattered. The journey back spanned 23 arduous days. The four moved slowly, bearing the injured doctor, who would sporadically regain consciousness only to relapse into slumber. Food was critically scarce. They subsisted on berries, roots, and on one occasion, managed to kill a monkey with an arquebus. Water posed another significant challenge. They were forced to drink from streams, leading all four to contract a fever. The creature relentlessly pursued them, not continuously, but with disturbing regularity. They often heard distant roars, discovered its footprints, and observed trees broken in ways they hadn't been on their outward journey. On the 5th day of their return, they glimpsed the creature itself in the distance, partially obscured by trees. It stood on its hind legs, using a tree trunk for support, its gaze fixed in their direction. It did not chase them, merely watched before turning and retreating into the forest. The clerk noted in his diary that the beast seemed to be toying with them. It could have dispatched them at any moment, yet it refrained, merely following and asserting its presence. Perhaps it was sated, or perhaps it derived amusement from their predicament. The monster's motives were unfathomable. On May 12th, the 18th day of their return, Dr. Antonio succumbed. His wounds had festered, and the infection, coupled with a virulent fever, consumed him. In his final moments, he raved about demons and damnation. They interred him in a shallow grave, marking the spot with a cross made of branches. The 3 remaining individuals pressed on, their strength rapidly diminishing. John had injured his leg and limped, relying on a makeshift crutch. Doe suffered from dysentery, his body weakened. The scribe, though faring better than the others, also felt his physical limits approaching. On May 20th, they reached a familiar river, the same one where they had spotted the abandoned village. They struggled to cross on logs, with Joan nearly drowning. The current was powerful, and though they dragged him ashore, he had ingested water and was left coughing and sputtering. The coast was approximately 50 miles from the river. They continued for another 10 days, the final stretch reduced to literal crawling, their strength entirely depleted. However, on May 29th, the sight of the ocean, vast, azure, and magnificent, greeted their eyes. A patrol from San Vicente discovered them on the shoreline. 3 emaciated, half-dead individuals covered in sores and fever. They were transported to the settlement and placed under the care of doctors. Out of the 23-member expedition, only 3 survived. Joanne passed away a week after his return, the infection ultimately claiming him. Dio recovered, but vowed never to re-enter the jungle. The clerk, Souza, slowly recuperated, enduring 2 months of fever before finally regaining his health. Once he could wield a pen, he meticulously documented the expedition in a detailed report. He recounted everything: the discoveries, the assaults, and the creature. From memory, he sketched its footprints, the skull from the village, and the beast itself as he had seen it illuminated by gunshots. The report, along with his diary, was dispatched to the king. 6 months later, a reply arrived. The king expressed gratitude for his service and granted compensation to the families of the deceased. However, he also commanded Souza to remain silent about the specific details. The official narrative would be that the expedition had perished from disease and attacks by hostile natives, with no mention of the creature. Souza complied, living another 34 years in archival work and trade record keeping. He never returned to the jungle, but cherished his diary throughout his life. Before his death, he entrusted it to his grandson, instructing him to safeguard it as evidence. Centuries after Quau's expedition, in the 1910s, scientists commenced discovering the bones of giant sloths in Brazilian caves and swamps. These colossal creatures, dubbed megatheres, could stand up to 4 meters tall and weigh as much as 4 tons. According to conventional science, they inhabited the Pliocene epoch and became extinct approximately 10,000 years ago. Yet, some paleontologists noted an anomaly. Megatherium bones found in certain regions were younger, dating back several thousand years, and in some instances, merely a few centuries. Some bones bore marks from stone tools, indicating human interaction or hunting. Furthermore, the Tupi-Guarani Indians continue to recount legends of the Mapinguari, a formidable forest demon with a mouth in its stomach that preys on humans. Elders caution young hunters against venturing into specific jungle territories, designating them as Mappingari's domain, where those who enter never return. Contemporary cryptozoologists delve into these tales, collecting testimonies from local inhabitants who swear they have encountered a colossal beast deep within the forest. Descriptions vary, yet common traits persist. Immense size, dense fur, a terrifying roar, and an aggressive demeanor. Official scientific circles remain skeptical of these accounts. The likelihood of a large mammal surviving undetected in the Amazon to this day is considered exceedingly remote. However, Brazil's jungles are vast, with many areas remaining unexplored, leaving the precise nature of what may lurk in their depths unknown. Miguel de Souza's diary resides in a private collection in Lisbon. Its pages have yellowed, and the ink has faded, but the text remains legible. The sketches of footprints, the creature, and maps are preserved. Some researchers consider the document authentic, while others dismiss it as a 19th-century fabrication. Nevertheless, the fact remains. In 1521, a Portuguese expedition of 23 individuals ventured into the Brazilian jungle, and only 3 emerged. The others perished under circumstances that official history prefers not to elaborate upon. And somewhere, deep within the Amazon's verdant labyrinth, in areas untouched by human presence for centuries, an ancient, terrifying entity may still roam, the last vestige of a species presumed extinct millennia ago, yet which adapted and endured. It patiently awaits the next unwitting travelers foolish enough to trespass on its territory. The Mappinguari, a man-eater demon with a mouth in its stomach. The last of the megatheriums. Its existence remains a matter of individual belief, but the indigenous people, without doubt, know. They steer clear of those forested areas.